Today I'm speaking with Seráh Blain. Seráh, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for joining me. And I just wanted to give a brief bio for Seráh. And in case you don't know how to spell that, it is in the description or the name of this video, but it is S-E-R-A with an acute mark, H, Seráh. And do you know what that name means, by the way?
I do. So it's actually somewhat of a mistake. My dad was learning Hebrew when I was born and was trying to give me the Hebrew pronunciation of Sarah, which is Sarah. So he was a little bit off.
Well, I looked it up briefly and I saw that some people said it meant princess or angel or star, and I wasn't sure if that sounded right to you.
Yeah, Sarah does mean princess.
Okay, very cool. And going on with the bio, Seráh studied journalism at Elgin Community College. She was the former executive director and lobbyist at the Secular Coalition for Arizona. And correct me on any of this if I'm incorrect. You are the co-host and producer at Humanist Experience, a unique podcast series that seeks out radical experiences that educate our emotions and expand our world. You're a partner and senior strategist at Spectrum Experience, values-based political communications firm. You're on the board of directors at the Arizona Interfaith Movement, a panelist at Nonprofit Status, which is a venue for an alternative, compassionate narrative on atheism. You are currently also as well the communications director at Foundation Beyond Belief, an organization that focuses on humanist approaches to charity and disaster recovery, including humanist ethics and overall creating a more compassionate, equitable, and inclusive world. Foundation Beyond Belief, by the way, for anyone who doesn't know of it, it was founded in 2009 in Georgia by Dale McGowan. I know we've all heard of him, who envisioned a way for humanists to give to charity to make the world a better place without any supernatural motivation or belief. And again, it's a humanist charity that promotes secular volunteering and responsible charitable giving, taking action today for a better tomorrow. And they carefully select secular organizations as partners and beneficiaries. Is that all correct so far?
That is.
And on the final side, you're the mom of 2 children. You're, again, an activist who's worked in the atheist and humanist movement for 10 years. You've worked on over 20 political campaigns focusing on advancing social justice through public policy and grassroots organizing. So that's a long list of stuff. You've been very, very busy.
I have been.
Of all those things, what would you say is kind of been the high point of all the circles you've been involved in?
I've had a million high points, but I really do love having gone through a bunch of different careers within the humanist movement, now having my own humanist communications firm and being able to really focus on shifting culture toward humanism and working with some awesome clients to get that done.
That's awesome. Well, we do want to hear more about that in a second, and we'll go into several aspects of what you do for work. I do want to talk a little bit about your personal secular journey, but before then, I do want to do a little icebreaker. Could you tell me, if you were going to Starbucks, what would be your favorite drink to order?
I just order whatever the medium roast is, black.
Okay.
Very simple.
I am the opposite. I've got this one drink that's got like 10 parts to it, and they always laugh at me, but like, it's so good this way.
No, I like bitter, and I'm that way with beer too. I pretty much just drink IPA. I like bitter.
Gotcha. Well, let me ask a different question then. Could you tell me the last book or two that you've read that you really impacted you?
Well, I just finished The Good Lord Bird by James McBride, which is a novel about the John Brown insurrection and taking over Harper's Ferry. And it's written from the perspective of a young enslaved boy who's mistaken for a girl. And it's just a hilarious book. I mean, the writing is just hilarious and very colorful, but it also does a really good job of really laying bare the horrors of slavery and just the impossible position of Black people when white people, whether they're abolitionists or pro-slavers, when they try and write the future for Black people rather than allowing Black people to have their own voice. So that was a really cool book. I'd recommend it.
What was it called again?
The Good Lord Bird.
Okay. I've never heard of that. That's good. I love when I ask for a book recommendation or a movie, and it's one that I've truly never heard of before. I've got something to look up. I was just speaking with Mandisa Thomas. I'm sure you know her, about 3 weeks ago, and
Yeah.
she, both the interview with her as well as just the research I did to prepare for it, was very inspirational but humbling, in the sense of, it was like I learned a lot, but it also exposed how much I don't know. And I kind of made it a personal commitment to learn those things that I knew I needed to learn before I speak with her again, to try to bring those up. And it's a lot of people in the Black community that, you know, from previous generations, that we just don't know their stories, and a lot of good work that they did to lay the groundwork. So it was cool to hear some of that. In terms of your story, I wanted to start there, and then again, we'll spend the bulk of our time talking about the Foundation Beyond Belief and your other work. But could you tell us a little bit more about yourself, your background, how you grew up, and if you were in a faith, and if you came out of it, how that worked?
Sure. So I grew up with, my dad is a United Methodist minister, and my mom has been through many different faith positions throughout her life. She was Methodist when she was married to my dad, and then they divorced, and she became more and more evangelical and more sort of fundamentalist. Although it was weird, I remember her like putting out a chair for Elijah at Easter, and we never really understood what that was about. And it turns out she had grown up in a mixed faith household and was Jewish, but my grandparents never practiced or talked about that. So as she became older, she went more into Judaism, and at the end of her life was a Hasidic Jew. So my stepdad, my mom isn't alive anymore, but my stepdad is a Hasidic Jew. So I have a very interfaith household and family, and
that's very interesting.
It's been a unique experience, and I appreciate getting lots of perspectives. But
when your dad was a minister, I know Methodism has a wide range, at least it does today. Would you consider it more liberal or more fundamentalist?
His social views are extremely liberal. Okay. His interpretation of the Bible is it's strange. It's not exactly literal, but it's more conservative than what you would think given his social views. But I definitely remember all of my parents really talking about scripture as metaphor, and any of the questions I had where the Bible didn't make sense, like, I remember being upset by the flood story, and like, why would God drown everybody? Like, and my parents really viewed that as like, it's like a poem, it's like a metaphor for evil and good. And
did you understand that there were Christians who didn't take it that way, or did that come later?
I did, but not. I had never really met them, so it was a surprise to me later in my life when I was practicing as a United Methodist, and all of a sudden, like, realized, oh, you guys really like believe this for realsies, like, and that was definitely a surprise to me. But I didn't have any personal conflicts with like science and religion, because if there was a question of science, the science was true and the religion was just sort of like narrative. Right. That was never an issue for me. So I think that I really grew up being a humanist. I used religious language to describe my worldview, and didn't know the word humanism for a long time. So yeah, and I do remember when I decided to stop using religious language. It's a really clear memory. I was with a Unitarian congregation, and we did some citizen lobbying on LGBTQ equality, and specifically gay marriage. And we were meeting with a legislator who was Catholic, and she was a Democrat. She's very liberal. She supported LGBTQ people, like their identity, and but when it came to legalizing gay marriage, she kept saying, like, my faith just doesn't allow it. Like, I'm open to civil unions, I'm open to a different way of doing this, but it can't be marriage. And so I'm here with this one religious group that's saying, like, our faith tradition says that gay marriage should be allowed and celebrated, and your faith is saying it shouldn't. And this is dumb. Like, this is a dumb conversation. The question should be, what's good for society? What's good for LGBTQ people? And we're not even having that debate. We're using all this faith language and without real justification for why it's true, other than that I believe it. And so at that point, I was like, I just need to stop using faith language when I'm talking about ethics. We need to just use facts about what's good for people. So
that's a great perspective. I was the opposite, as you may have seen if you've seen any of my videos where I talk about my story, but I was on the conservative, evangelical, fundamentalist side for over 40 years. And there was no other side that was acceptable. So I kind of understand some of where the lady is coming from. Sounds like she was more open to a balanced perspective, but yeah, it's amazing, the blinders, and it's amazing too once you step out of it to think that my whole ethic, my whole rationality for being okay with this and not okay with that, it was based on mythology. And once you realize that, you're like, what did I do? Like, what was this?
right.
And why did it take me so long to see it? But
yeah, and I've talked to a lot of people who had that experience, and I didn't really have that same like foundation shaking. It was just a shift of language. But even that was a challenge for me, because a lot of religious language is really beautiful, and like the comfort with poetry and allegory in religious speech. I mean, in the rational community, we don't do that. And I think we lose a lot of the power of language. So I felt really at a loss to how do I articulate what my values are now in a really beautiful and inspiring way, because we don't have that yet. And actually, Foundation Beyond Belief was one of the first organizations that I came across years and years ago. And it was probably just after they started that I found them, because that was about the same time that I was shifting into using secular language rather than religious language. But yeah, and Dale McGowan too has been an excellent communicator on humanist values. But this idea of we have a way to put our values into action. We do believe that positive change requires human intervention. So we're going to be that powerful force for change. That was all really inspiring. It's like, okay, there is a word for what I believe, and there are beautiful ways of articulating my values.
So did you ever have, and this is just from my understanding of your story and like a baseline, did you ever have a deep trust in Jesus as your savior, with the background of, you're a sinner, you've fallen short of God's glory, to get to heaven, you needed someone to take your place as the perfect substitute? Was that part of the equation for you?
No, and I did get saved as a kid, but it was kind of like, I remember it being sort of like a half-hearted thing, because I had a friend who asked me if I was saved, and I didn't really understand what that meant. So I remember praying like, I don't know if I have Jesus in my heart. So if you're not in my heart, will you just be in my heart? Like, it was like an aside, like, oh, maybe that's a box I didn't check. But I really more believed that it was almost like a pantheistic, like we're all part of this divine thing. And if there is a God, we reach up to God as a source of strength, but then we have to be the action, like we are God's hands and feet, which is not really different from what I believe now. I don't reach up into God, I reach to my fellow human beings, and we still have to be the human intervention in the world.
Yeah. So it sounds like you didn't really have a really strong or big watershed event where it just kind of overwhelmed you, like, oh my goodness, this wasn't real. It sounds like your drift out of it was very easy and smooth.
It really was pretty smooth, yeah. And I remember my mom asking me, and I don't think I identified quite as an atheist when she died, but I was definitely going in that direction with my language and my thinking. And she said, I'm just worried that you'll feel alone in the world. And like, I think that that can be true if you feel like you have God's presence with you all the time, and then suddenly there isn't a God. But I feel like my understanding of God's presence isn't gone. It really was just this connection with people, and I still have that feeling, and I have a sense of trust in other people and a sense of comfort in the world, and that, you know, bad things are going to happen, but we all help each other. You know, and especially coming from a Jewish tradition where we survived a Holocaust, and there are so many beautiful stories of love and care during that time. Um, so I just, yeah, so I reassured her, I don't at all feel alone in the universe.
Mm. It's interesting too. The word alone made me think of the idea of just not just the God issue, but the community. And it's
Right.
really good that you hadn't created your community solely around this one belief, because it's
No.
really hard when you're like, this is your, especially if it's your family, your extended family, your friends, you know, like almost everybody except maybe your secular job or something. But you know, if you work in an office somewhere, but it's like if everybody around you's believing this and you suddenly like, I'm not one of them anymore, you're literally kind of philosophically distancing yourself from 90% of your community. And that's hard. It's really hard to do.
Yeah, and I've met a lot of people who have dealt with that pain. In particular, there are a lot of Mormons in Arizona, and the Mormon community in particular is like, that is your whole world. And so if you leave that, it's very difficult. But
Hmm.
yeah, I mean, I talk about this a lot. I feel like one of the greatest gifts that my mom gave me was she just was a radically welcoming person. And so just built community around her wherever she went. And there were always people in our home, like, you know, if anybody needed to share a meal or needed a place to stay, or, you know, we're dealing with issues, like we just always had people around us.
Hmm.
And I've been able to do that wherever I go, where, you know, like our home is just an open home, and we have friends and we have community, and we yeah, so I just have always been able to feel connected to people. So I think a lot of the religious practices that my parents did were actually really humanist practices,
Hmm.
and they translate really well into humanism for me.
That's awesome. Now, this is starting to get, this is really good because we're kind of slowly moving right into your work now, but I was going to ask a question later, which will work better now. When you talk to people who are religious, like Christians, um, and you're talking about these issues like humanism and ethics, I'm assuming that you have a lot of people that either misunderstand, just say, what do you mean? Or I'm sure you've seen this too, where they just attack you and are like, you can't have ethics without a God. Like that doesn't equate. Do you have that? Is that true that you experienced that kind of pushback, and how aggressive has it been at times? And what do you typically do to try to help them, you know, at least try to take off the blinders a little bit and have an honest conversation about it?
Yeah, I mean, so I don't have a lot of sort of fundamentalist people in my world. And I've done a lot of interfaith work where people come together from different faith perspectives around sort of universal human values, like the golden rule or various conceptions of that. And I think that for folks who aren't fundamentalist, it's pretty easy to see that regardless of what our belief is, most humans have a base set of ethical values that we all subscribe to. So, I mean, I think you can point to that, and just, you know, beautiful, compassionate work that people from any walk of life have done. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty easy to disprove the idea that you can't be ethical without a God, because we see it all the time and there are such good examples of it. So,
Hmm.
somebody who's really fundamentalist and is really hung up on like whether ethics are objective or subjective, like I'm not going to be able to talk them into humanism being a valid ethical base, but
Yeah,
I don't run into a lot of those people.
that's good. I'm glad you don't. I do, and it's not fun. And what amazes me is not just the idea that they can't seem to conceive of the other side of it, meaning that you could be ethical without a God, or in my my verbiage of pretend God, but also that if you're going to go that route, like if you want to grant them for a second, for the sake of argument, that there is a God and he's your God, he's Yahweh, he's Jesus. Okay, so let's dig in. What did Yahweh do that made him so ethical? Okay, he initiated blood magic, so you're killing goats left and right. He initiated genocide, slavery, land theft, kidnapping, where they would slaughter everybody but take the little, the young girls away, kidnapping for who knows what bad reasons, certainly genital mutilation, um, certainly the idea of scapegoating, where you get to take your sins and you get to put them with someone else and your responsibility is gone. They would still say, no, you can sometimes get punished for your sins, but ultimately before God, your sins are forgiven. But, you could have someone that in that vein lived a really good life, but just never actually said, Jesus is my substitute, and that person goes to hell. And you have Hitler on his deathbed says, I believe in Jesus, he's my savior, he goes to heaven. Like the scapegoating issue and its ramifications, and the misogyny, and the slavery, where you can literally beat your slave until they're almost dead, and that's okay. Bequeathing slaves, and it's like, I just feel like I want to say, like, are you sure you want to hang your ethics on this book?
Right. I feel like people who take the Bible literally, Bible God is a pretty awful ethical character, in my view, but I never believed in that God, so it wasn't really an issue for me. But yeah.
Sounds like you were spared a lot. Yeah, and even his character, just the whole idea, like even if you ignored all the bad stuff that he did, it's like just a pure psychopathic nature. Like, I love you unconditionally, but if you don't love me back, you're gonna burn in hell. Like that's that's abusive beyond words. But it's I'm glad you were spared a lot of that. Well, with what you're doing, obviously you've come from a background that sounds like it was very healthy, in terms of giving you a balanced perspective on the world. You've obviously kind of taken all that energy and education and background, and you're working right now with a foundation Beyond Belief. Could you tell us just a little bit more, for anyone who hasn't heard of it, what you all do there, and what your specific role is at that group?
Yeah, well, so I'm the communications director there, and as you said in the introduction, Dale McGowan founded Foundation Beyond Belief about 10 years ago, with the aim to kind of organize and focus humanist giving, because with religious congregations, giving is really built in. So people tend to give more. It's easy. You give 10%, you tithe. There's a plate passed around all the time. And while lots of atheists and humanists do give, the incentive isn't the same. It's not as regular. We're not asked as routinely. And so he really wanted to help make more of an impact, and encourage the humanist community to be involved in that. So, and so it's really grown and added programs over the years. We actually just launched a new mission statement, that's much more sort of honed in on some specific sustainable development goals, so that we can really amplify the humanist impact and create a world that, where everyone has access to their basic necessities. So the new mission is focused specifically on poverty and hunger, health and well-being, and then economic opportunity. So there are 4 major programs that we do right now. We give humanist grants to organizations that are working on these issues and that share our humanist values. And we're a little bit over $3 million that we've given to charities since our founding. As you said, we do disaster recovery work. Disaster recovery efforts right now are overwhelmingly religious. I think the Southern Baptist Convention is one of the biggest on the ground disaster recovery efforts. And when people are in a really vulnerable situation where they've just lost their homes, they've just experienced tragedy, even if an organization isn't openly proselytizing, it's still uncomfortable to have people wearing shirts with faith symbols on them, handing out stuff, and you have to sort of suck in your own faith position to accept what you need. So it's really nice to be able to support secular efforts, to help people with no strings attached. We have a program in Ghana that originally started to work with women who had been shunned and put into witch camps. There's a lot of superstition around witchcraft still in Ghana. And so working with communities to try and educate people and overcome that superstition and reintegrate women back into their own communities, and also providing relief in those camps. We now have a vocational training program that teaches mostly women, although we do have a male student right now too, how to be tailors. So they're learning how to make dresses, and they'll be able to have financial stability through that. And I actually just putting together our annual report right now. So I've been trying to get lots of stories from people to include in that. And one of the stories I read was this young girl whose father was trying to get her married off, basically so that she would have financial stability. And her mom found out about this program and enrolled her. So she was able to put off basically an arranged marriage in order to do this program. And now she'll be able to support herself and make independent choices rather than having those decisions made for her. So that was really inspiring to see that.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And then we have a volunteer network, which is, we work with, I think we have about 160 volunteer teams all over the world. Most of them are in the US, but we have one of our most active teams is in the Philippines, and they're doing some literacy work there that's really encouraging. But we support local groups in doing volunteer work in their own communities. And again, just having a way of putting humanist values at work and serving the community without there being, religion attached to it is really cool.
It is very cool. When you said that, it made me think of my experience when I was younger. I was involved in all the typical stuff a Christian would be, who was very, very passionate about it. I went to school to be a pastor and missionary. But years ago, when I was maybe 18 to 22, I was very involved, even before that, with a group in a very poor part of Pennsylvania, right outside Philadelphia. It's called Chester. It's very poor, at least it was when I was growing up. And there was a lot of opportunities there to help and minister. And I went to a soup kitchen quite a lot. And it was always the whole thing of you come in, you sit for a 30, 45 minute service, and then you go get your food. And, of course, at the time, it was like, what a wonderful thing. They hear the gospel and then they get their bellies full. But now that I'm on this side, once I've, in my words, escaped the Bible prison, I'm like, what a horrible thing to do to people, to say you to get this handout, you have to listen to my spiel, and it's one you've heard before, so you have to listen to it over and over. And if you don't want to get the food, then if you don't want to listen, then you don't get the food. And it's like you really have to escape it to realize how crazy it is to say you're not getting help unless I can give you my message. And that's
right.
It's so sad.
It's really sad, and it's frustrating. I mean, even some of the more progressive faith groups that don't require you to do some kind of religious act before, there's still so much religion in the work. I remember talking with a Presbyterian woman recently who was like, well, we don't proselytize, we don't, but all over the website for their organization, it's, really religious language. And for somebody who's either secular or belongs to any religion besides Christianity, that's really uncomfortable. And I did a fundraising project many years ago where I was raising money for a homeless shelter, and I did this publicity stunt where I said I was going to sleep on the streets until I was able to raise, I think it was $50,000. So I spent time with people experiencing homelessness and went to a lot of the places that they go to get food. And the largest provider in downtown Phoenix of meals is St. Vincent de Paul's. And when you're in line waiting to get served, there's somebody preaching at you, and on the wall there's all these religious symbols and really graphic pictures of Jesus on the cross, really gruesome. And it's just, it just doesn't feel good. And I actually, there was a Foundation Beyond Belief group that volunteered at St. Vincent de Paul's regularly. So there was one time that I went there that they were there serving, and it was like just this like joy in my heart seeing other atheists there and like being able to connect with them was like, yeah, it was really relieving after being around all of that religion. But yeah, I mean, where we went to get coffee and donuts in the morning was at this little like church house where they make you pray before you get your stuff. There was like a hot dog cart that would come out every day, and the same deal. They have you pray before the meal. Yeah, it's
very manipulative. On that note, I wanted to ask, do you, this is a little bit of an aside, but have you gotten into it all, either in your own work or any of the organizations you work with, how manipulative a lot of this religious stuff is towards children, in terms of like even what you said with the pictures on the wall, where you take a child's best instinct, which is to feel bad for someone in pain, and you show them this picture of this, horrible man that's being mangled and killed this way with the crown of thorns and the blood and the nails, and you say, he's there on that cross because you're a sinner. You did this to him, and he would have had to die, even if you were the only person, because you would have still sinned. And just, making kids feel like you're responsible for this, and don't you feel so bad?
right. Well, and that for me was the final straw for leaving. I said earlier that having that realization that other people really believe this is literally true. Well, so having my daughter in Sunday school as a very young child, and the way that they're teaching kids like it's a factual true story, and having her exposed to those ideas. And actually, I remember I had a very dear friend of mine had her daughter in a religious preschool, and their family isn't religious. And I think she was like 3 when they were told the crucifixion story. And that's a really gruesome story. And that was actually her first exposure to the concept of death at all. So to have that be the association of death, and a couple of months after that, her family's horse died, and she thought that the horse had been crucified because that's what she thought death was. So, and like, just imagine a little child thinking their family pet had been tortured in that way. It's like awful imagery to show to a kid. But yeah, so having my daughter being taught those things, I was just like, this is not, I can't be part of this. And it sucked because it was a church community that I really loved the people in, but it wasn't. So that's when I switched over to the Unitarian congregation.
Did you find the support there and the kind of the understanding of how the world works? Did you find that to be a lot more healthy, or did you feel like you were still needing to take it further to just get out of the God stuff, or where were you with
did.
that?
So, and most Unitarian congregations, and it varies between where you are in the country, but most of them are very non-theistic in their language, and most people's beliefs are not particularly supernatural. But there are some, and I actually, the community that we belonged to, there were a lot of kind of new agey beliefs, and yeah, I take issue with some of that and how it impacts people's access to healthcare that's, real. So, and again, as I said, in my experience with lobbying and having the basis of those arguments be religious ones still, I just ultimately decided I wanted to not use religious language to define my values or my work in the world.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's so freeing. Like when you're in it, you don't see it as that bad, but once you're out of it, it's like the whole world just gets brighter and happier, and it's like
it really does. And I remember somebody asking me, like, doesn't it make you feel sad, or like, aren't you afraid, or now that there's not a divine God, that there's not meaning. It's like, and I really feel the opposite. Like, the universe is this cold, dead, value neutral place. It doesn't care about us. And what that means is if we want there to be love and compassion and joy and goodness in the world, we get to create it. And that's like all the love that exists come from sentient beings. That's a really powerful fact. Like, we are creating all the good things.
Hmm.
And that to me is way more empowering than just waiting for the whims of a deity. Like, no, we're building this. We're building a world of love and justice. That's our power now.
Hmm. Yeah, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think Dan Barker wrote a book called Life-Driven Purpose, which was to oppose the whole purpose-driven life thing that the one
Right.
pastor had written. And I think it's that idea of like, there is a purpose to this, but it's driven by life and humanism rather than some God. And it, I remember when I was a Christian for 43 years, and I know some people would say, well, if you got out, it wasn't real. You never were a Christian. I was a Christian. I'd memorized thousands of verses. I'd preached the gospel, the clear gospel, dozens of times to many congregations. I had gone to school to be a pastor. I had gone to school to be a missionary, like a Bible translator in a jungle environment. I had lived with tribal people in preparation for that. I had before I deconverted, I had 1,000-page manuscript on a prayer book I'd written and 1,000-page manuscript on Christian worldview. It was real.
Yeah.
And I will say, and I've said this in other chats I've had, where like you ask people like, didn't you lose your peace and your sense of like, I know what the world's about? And I had more peace in the first week as an atheist than in 43 years as a Christian. And I know they can't understand that. Like, that doesn't make sense, does not compute, but it's true. It's true. And once you realize you were all these cults, like, oh, that cult's so bad, Scientology is just crazy, this is crazy. You're like, I was in a cult too, I just didn't know it. And the freedom of thinking I escaped something that, to be honest, a lot of people cannot. There is no perspective that allows them to think other than this is the truth, this is the final truth. To think I escaped something that some of the best minds on the planet and in history couldn't escape. Like, that's amazing to me, and it's freeing. I do want to ask, you're talking about a couple of things that made me think about the whole issue with the current systemic racism, the Black Lives Matter movement. In either your journey with your different organizations you work with, or just your personal conversations, do you feel like what you're coming from with your conversations about healthy ethics and a humanistic perspective, do you feel like that's bringing some helpfulness to the whole systemic racism, and especially the Black Lives Matter discussions currently going on?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what's really cool about having a naturalistic worldview and being so steeped in rational thought is that we're really comfortable with the idea of confronting our own biases. And we know that we have all of these, status quo bias, and there are just so many things that we know are cognitive facts about how people look at the world that we can look at head on and then try and set those aside and view reality and make change. So I think that people who are really serious about humanism and naturalistic worldviews are more easily able to see systemic racism and to be willing to make change. But it is hard. I mean, our movement, the atheist and humanist movement, is majority white, and a lot of people with privilege who aren't connected to those issues. So we have to try extra hard to understand them because it's just so removed from our day-to-day experience. And that's one of the reasons that I emphasize experience as a moral tool so much, because if we're just reading about things, we're only getting a factual basis. We're not encountering the context of those facts at all. And so when you interact with people who are experiencing police violence, for example, and experience racism in their everyday life, that's really different from just knowing numbers. And so I think, I like to say that our rational thought makes us smart, but experience educates our emotions and makes us wise. And so it's really important to not draw conclusions before you engage fully in an issue.
Yeah, I'm very curious as for anyone that's watching this much later than the recording of it, and doesn't associate the date. We're about 6 days away from our election, so of Donald Trump versus Biden. It's going to be very interesting to see how that plan plays out and some of the repercussions of that. So it's an interesting time we live in.
It is.
With some of these issues, I know that in some of the videos I listened to of yours, listened to prepare for our interview, you talked about the rejection of reason and how it could potentially threaten our very existence. Could you elaborate just a little bit on that for anyone who hasn't really thought through that issue?
Yeah, I mean, I think that climate change is a really big one, right? Like that's, we could make this planet unlivable. It's possible that we have done so much damage and will continue to do so much damage that human life can't continue here. And if we are unwilling to look at that and make the necessary changes and just trust in some kind of religious future, or a new life on a new planet, we're in big trouble. And I think that's true with issues like overpopulation. If we're going to continue to have this stigma against birth control and abortion care, and that impacts economic development. There are just all of these really huge issues that require rational thinking rather than emotional thinking. And racial justice is an issue like this too, even where it's not religiously driven. A lot of white people aren't able to see the factual realities and are just stuck with their biases. And we can't fix this. We cannot fix this if we aren't willing to be like courageously searching for the truth. So yeah, rational thinking is critical.
It's amazing as you say that. I'm always struck by just how much so many of these issues, not the racial issues or the environmental issues per se, but just taking a step back from all the individual issues and just talking about the worldview perspective, because you can't fix people's perspectives on these little issues unless you fix the worldview, in my opinion, and yet it comes down so much to psychology. Like it isn't like so many people aren't interested in the facts. Especially, it's pretty obvious to me with the issue of evolution, where, a lot of Christians, at least in the groups that I tended to work with, the Earth is 6,000 to 10,000 years old, and that's a fact, and that's a solid fact, and evolution is just ridiculous. And so you can't even have a discussion with them about an opposing view, and it seems at face value that the need at that point is to say, well, let me give you all this evidence and facts. But I've learned a lot of it's not about the facts. Like it's really about psychology. Like some people, it comes down to, this is oversimplifying it, I'm sure, but it comes down to my mommy and daddy told me what the truth is. And
right.
I know what it is. And, if I were to believe, your perspective, I'd be rejecting my mom, my dad, my grandparents, my wonderful pastor, my all these wonderful people. And it's like, it hurts so much to even crack that door open a little bit to say they were wrong. It wasn't like they lied to you on purpose, but they did effectively tell you something that's not true, gravely, mistaken. It's like, it's so painful. And then the whole, even if, your parents are deceased or something and they're not really part of the equation, there's like this current psychological issue of like, I know that my daddy up in heaven is looking down on me saying, I'm so pleased with you. I'm so happy with you. Keep reading that book and keep praying to me. You make me feel so good that we're in such a good relationship. We're good. And it's like a drug. It's like, you can't break people from this. And I feel like in all the things I'm learning, it's like I need to spend some time just learning psychology to be able to even just interpret my own past.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's important in the humanist movement too. Like, what, we're as humanists much less dogmatic than a lot of religions, but we are 100% still susceptible to all of the biases that people who are in religious traditions are susceptible to. And again, I think that we're seeing that with racial justice issues right now. I mean, as you say, if we accept what the Black liberation movement is telling us, that means that we have to admit that we have been complicit in racism our whole lives. And that doesn't feel good. That, that means my parents taught me to be racist in some of the ways that we interact in the world. And I love my parents. I don't want to think that about them. I don't want to think that about myself. But as humanists, we're supposed to be allies of the truth and reality. And so, even if the truth is unhappy and uncomfortable, we have to accept it and buck tradition and move forward. So
yeah, that's a good reminder. And I've heard other atheists say something similar, that all the rational cognitive biases that we see in other people, we're totally susceptible to them. And just because you're an atheist doesn't mean you're a great thinker. You could be an atheist with some really bad thinking.
Yes.
Could you give me some examples of advocacy that we in the atheist and secular community should be more involved in and educated about, that you typically see a lack of education, where maybe you talk about something and people are like, I just didn't know that was a big issue, or maybe I knew about it, but I didn't realize it was something I should be that passionate about? Like, is there anything that you just get surprised out of people's ignorance?
I get surprised at people's apathy. I think that we are pretty passionate and good at working on, secular church-state separation issues. I think that the atheist and secular movement has organized around those issues really well, and they're very important. I want people to stay involved in that. But it's harder for people to see the connection between, why I'm an atheist and why I should care about homelessness, and then what I should do about it. And I think that part of it is that we're so focused on rationality and on disproving Christianity that we're not as focused on, like, oh, hey, we have a human responsibility to make the world better. So I want people to do a better job of getting in touch with their compassionate centers and, having experiences, cultivating empathy. Those are really important moral tools. And I read a book a while back. I think it's called Humanity, A Moral History of the 20th Century. And it goes over a lot of the atrocities that have happened in the 20th century, various genocides, some of the stuff that US soldiers did during the Vietnam War. And it asks how we're capable of that. How did these things happen? Like, where does psychology fail that humans can turn into such monstrous beings? And it really emphasizes the importance of cultivating moral tools to protect ourselves from becoming monstrous, because it can happen to any of us. I mean, those people who participated in those acts, most of them were just regular people. And certainly a lot of times the leadership are sociopathic, there's something wrong there, but you have to get everybody to go along with it. And how do we protect ourselves from becoming those people? And so we have to cultivate empathy and compassion. And rationality is so important, but it is not enough by itself. So that's where I get really passionate. It's like, we just need to do more work on being compassionate and being the human action in the world that makes it better, because there isn't supernatural action in the world.
Yeah, I meant to ask, you mentioned too the homelessness. Did you say you actually lived like on the street for a while?
I did. It was about a month that I was living on the street as part of this fundraising project. And I also did experience homelessness as a teenager, but I didn't ever have to sleep on the street.
Gotcha.
So that's that's definitely an issue that I care a lot about, and that there's a lot of stigma around people who are having that experience that's just completely false. So it was a cool project in that I got to tell a lot of stories and introduce people to, you know, regular folks who end up in this situation because of an unlucky series of events that could happen to almost anybody.
Yeah.
And yeah, and
Mm.
really trying to look at solutions that aren't necessarily intuitive, but that are reason based. So, like, there was just a study out recently about giving cash to people experiencing homelessness, because we're all, you know, everybody's like, well, don't just give them cash; they'll buy drugs and alcohol. And the study actually showed that if when they have cash, they spend much less money on alcohol and are able to spend less time trying to secure food and bus fare and basic necessities like that. So they much more quickly get jobs and housing. Um,
Mm.
so it's, you know, counterintuitive, but it's the truth. So that's what we should be doing if we want to solve that problem.
It's funny. I did hear that objection years ago, many times. Don't give them money.
Yeah. And even if it were true that some people do spend money on drugs and alcohol, I don't really care. I mean, I don't spend my money responsibly all the time, you know, and I also think that living on the streets is really rough. And if somebody needs, you know, a cigarette to like get through the day, I think they deserve a cigarette. Like, I don't want somebody to suffer all the time. But
Yeah.
again, like the reality is people are going to spend less money on those sort of recreational, like things that soothe pain, when they actually have resources to solve the problem.
Yeah. I love how you were focusing on the idea of really developing empathy from a humanist perspective. I love at night. I very often will tell my kids a story that will make up. Um, and I've been doing it for years, you know, because my wife, we've got 4 little ones, so my wife is often with the littlest one, you know, nursing him to sleep or something. So with the older ones, I'll tell them a story to go to bed, and you know, they range from all kinds of stuff. Sometimes it's just a take of some movie they've seen, like Frozen, or something else. But one of the ones that I love telling, because I see their reaction to it, is I'll tell a story about empathy, and I'll say, you know, one day, you know, Owen and Abby and Ethan, you three went to a park and you were playing, and you were about to, you know, go back to the car because you were done. And as you're walking back through the park to the car to leave, you saw a little boy who's crying. And then I just start putting them in the story, like, and you ask the little boy, why are you crying? And he says, oh, I was going to play with those other boys, but you know, they're this color and I'm not, and they made fun of me. And I'll say, and then you guys said, well, we really love you and we want to be your friend. And the little boy that was crying was suddenly happy, you know. And then, you know, go into a different story where someone doesn't have food, and you go run and get your snack and share with them, and you make them happy. And you can, and as I go through this, you can literally see like the embarrassment on their faces, like they're so, it's like it's so cool to help somebody. They're like embarrassed at how amazing it is, like they're as if they're being put, you know, in front of a big audience as they're showing this empathy. And you know, or little girl's walking, but her legs are broken, so she's walking with a limp, and she's crying because no one wants to play with her. You know, they want to play with her, and just developing that sense of empathy. And it's not related to any kind of God. It's what we pass on because we want them to understand how, like you said, the golden rule of, like, if you want people to love you, you know, and you do, you love them. And you, even if you didn't feel like you need to love, you love people just because you want to. You can choose to, just because you choose to. You can just have that power.
Yeah, exactly. I love it. And it really, when we're more empathetic, we're more motivated to act. So you know, just knowing that the world is messed up doesn't make us, you know, want to do anything about it. But when we're connected to people and we really care about their pain, then we're gonna work for change. So we want to keep that sense heightened so that we stay motivated.
Yeah. I was curious, with all the organizations you work with, is there much talk about trying to get more atheist and secular politicians involved in the political world?
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge part of the work that I did in Arizona. after I left the secular coalition, I ran a congressional race for James Woods, who was an atheist running out of, it was actually the most conservative district in the country at the time. It's a very Mormon district, and he ran as an open atheist.
Wow.
And it was an unwinnable race, but the purpose of it was to have this public dialogue about atheism and morality and rationality in politics. And it's interesting because that race, we really struggled for legitimacy among the Democratic Party. Like, they were really uncomfortable with us talking publicly about atheism. A lot of other candidates didn't want to share events with us or be seen in photos with James. And now it's so commonplace. There's so many openly atheist and humanist and secular politicians in Arizona, partly
Awesome.
because of the political work we've done. And then the secular coalition has done a lot of lobbying and making secular politicians feel comfortable being out. So there are not nearly as many political consequences for atheists there. But yeah, I spent at least 2 election cycles with that being a primary goal, to get more atheists and humanists in office, and then to get the existing ones to be comfortable talking about it openly, because there are a lot of secular people in office, but there are a lot of places where they feel like they can't be public about it.
You think you'll ever run for something like that?
I don't know. I like writing speeches a lot more than giving them. So
Well, it's amazing to me when I think about, and I think a lot about politics. Not that I'm interested per se in getting involved in all as a politician. I don't think I've got the background for it per se, but it strikes me that whenever I think about that idea, I have this perception that, and I might be misperceiving this, but I think Christians would start to feel almost immediately persecuted just by virtue of the fact that there's an atheist in office. And it surprises me to think that, and again, maybe some people wouldn't, they'd be like, no, as long as you do a good job for our community, we don't care what you believe. But it's like, I think we've had almost every president, if not everyone, 50 some presidents in a row that have either been Christians or at least claimed to be. And, maybe claim to be for political reasons, but, they said on paper, I'm a Christian. And it's like, if you really want to claim persecution, let's wait till it's even. Like, let's have another 50 some atheist presidents. And, so give the other side a fair chance, 200 plus years, and see how we do. And then if you still feel like after those numbers even up, that you're persecuted, then we'll talk. But, we haven't had one single president who's just straight up said, I don't have a mythological worldview. I don't want that. I'm not, it's not
right.
Even like, I've got one, but I'm going to put it on the back burner. Like, I don't have it anywhere. It's not part of my psyche. I don't believe in a God. And
I remember, I think it was the election that Obama was running against Hillary Clinton, that they did a faith forum for the Democratic candidates. And it was just like, I don't believe for a minute that Hillary Clinton has a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. I just, like, she is such a rational, and like, I just don't believe it. And she seemed so uncomfortable, but it just felt like she had to jump through those hoops and say those words and like talk about her faith that you never hear. Like, she never talks about her personal religion. So I feel like it was super fake. But whereas Obama was much more comfortable articulating, sort of a religious worldview from his experiences in the Black church, and that's just part of the culture.
Yeah.
But yeah, and it was a big deal. I remember when there was the first speech that Obama gave where he mentioned non-believers, and like the whole atheist community freaked out, like, he mentioned us. But it's absurd that you have to use Christian language. And even Bernie Sanders, I mean, come on, that man is not religious, but he won't say he's an atheist. He, claims his Judaism, which, I mean, he is Jewish, but like, why can't you just,
yeah,
it's like, just admit it?
it's like it's currently political suicide, but it seems like just I mean, I probably won't live to see the day, but it just seems like as generations come and generations go, things are changing. You know, the numbers of the nuns is increasing. And it seems like
Right.
at some point it will not be political suicide to say it very
Right,
publicly.
and I've seen that happen in Arizona. You know that it's just much more commonplace now. But I think that even for those of us who aren't going to run for office, and maybe especially those of us who aren't continuing to articulate a positive atheist worldview and showing people what that really is, and living good lives and being open about where our motivations for ethics come from, that really shifts the perception. So when you say, you know, like an atheist being elected would make a Christian feel persecuted, that's true if they have this picture of atheists as really antagonistic, hateful, you know, versus, you know, like the whole frame of Foundation Beyond Belief, which is, you know, all of this compassionate action and doing a lot of the same work for a lot of the same reasons that religious organizations do. I think that when folks are exposed to that picture of atheism and humanism, it helps them to understand that it's not a threat to their own health and happiness.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It's a good reminder. It's like wow, you guys aren't the baby eating people I thought you were going to be.
Right, right.
On the note of that, and you spoke about you know, presenting the what you do in a way that's you know, gentle and palatable, so to speak, to Christians or people of faith. You've also talked in some of your I'm just reading some of my notes here. You've talked in some of your presentations about how there's still, as much as you want to be gentle and you certainly want to be peaceful and keep the conversation going, there is an implied conflict. There's a conflict of values. How do you how do you balance this? We don't want to write people off ever. We don't want to say, you know, to hell with that system, because there's people in the system that, you know, we care about. But at the same time, there are some systems in place that are really bad, and a lot of them have been given plenty of time to kind of slowly make positive changes, and they don't. And it seems like to a lot of us, the answer is the change needs to be a little bit more radical.
Right.
It needs to be much more, not in your face in a mean way, and certainly not in a violent way, but just it's time to make change. It's past time to make change, especially with things like climate change and certainly racism. It's how do you do that without making enemies? Like, not both how do we do it, but how do you personally do it, where you know, where you can have a hard conversation, but then go out for a beer with someone afterwards and you're still friends.
Yeah, I mean, well, and some people don't have diplomatic personalities and don't want to do that work. And I think that that's also fine. Like we need, you know, we need some of those people who are just willing to, you know, Chris Hitchens kind of folks who can.
Dawkins.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
saw it. You met him in person, right?
I
Richard
have
Dawkins.
met him a few times. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. But I am a diplomatic person and I find it easy to like people. And you know, when I was lobbying for Secular Coalition, it's dumb. Like just, I mean, you compliment somebody on their hair and then everybody feels warm and then you can have a hard conversation. And then, you know, you can just, I think it's like finding ways to connect and being respectful in your language. But yeah, there definitely are situations where we have to intervene more powerfully. I think, you know, police brutality is one of those issues where it's not enough to just ask nicely. Like we're going to have to do some direct action to get change on that issue. But yeah, I mean, human relationships count for a lot, and we know this. You know, in the LGBTQ movement, people who have a personal friend or relative that's gay or transgender consistently report less homophobic and transphobic views, regardless of their background, whether they come from really religious conservative backgrounds. They'll be less homophobic and transphobic if they have a personal relationship. So building those relationships, even with people who have beliefs that we find abhorrent, is important for making change. But it's also completely acceptable to intervene sometimes when the moral line has been crossed. And it's tricky to feel that out. Where do we decide that I have to be stronger on this? I can't just be nice. And I don't there's not a clear answer to when we know that's true. But I think that listening to people who are experiencing marginalization is a good way to know, if the Black community is telling us, if the LGBTQ community is telling us, like, this is too much, this oppression is too much, it's time, then we have to listen, we have to trust them.
It's amazing too how when you look at history, there are a lot of times where change didn't happen, and all of a sudden it happened very quickly.
Yes.
And it's like we're seeing some of that, not as much as probably some of us would like, but we're seeing some of that in our own lifetime.
Yeah, I mean, I like when the final court decision happened that legalized gay marriage, I was so bowled over. Like, I thought I would be working on that issue my whole life. I did believe that we would succeed, but I thought it would be decades and decades. And like, I felt kind of at a loss when it happened. I'm like, oh, what do I even work on now? Like, what's
cross such an important bridge.
Yeah, I was really shocked by that. And that, that work isn't over. We're having backlash to it, and we've got the Supreme Court situation might create some challenges for that. So we still have to stay vigilant. But yeah, I mean, it happened so much faster than what I thought.
Yeah. And that Supreme Court thing that was so frustrating.
Yes.
It never ceases to shock me when I think we have people at the highest level of everything in this land whose base worldview is utterly informed by mythology.
Yeah.
I can't, it's hard to even believe it. I did want to kind of wrap up by asking you a little bit about your future projects, going back to Foundation Beyond Belief, and also maybe just any kind of dream projects when you're on the back burner that are going to come forward. Like, what are you working on in the next year or two, and what aren't you working on that you might like to bring into fruition at some point?
Well, I mean, I think that the most urgent work right now for humanists is climate and Black liberation movements. I think that we really need to be involved in that. And I think the humanist movement is pretty good in terms of beliefs related to climate. Like, we're all on the same page about that. But police violence and those issues, there's a lot of work to do among the white humanist community, and getting our movement to be more diverse and to be more present with people experiencing marginalization. I'm pretty passionate about figuring out ways to do that.
With the police brutality one, what do you think most people need to be thinking and doing to be more involved?
Well, I mean, so there are so many good organizations that are working on that. It's super easy to get connected to them and just listen to them. So just Google Black Lives Matter and you'll find something local and get connected. And I think it's going to be hard because you're going to have to confront your own biases when you do that. I mean, a lot of people just don't think that they're complicit in racism, and you're going to find out that you are, and it's not going to feel good. So be ready for that. But yeah, I mean, I really emphasize experience. Like, I just think we need to be more present with people experiencing these issues so that we will come to understand them and then know what we need to do next. So yeah, go offer to help and learn, and don't talk as much, like, just listen a little bit more. But in terms of back burner projects, I really want to get more involved in hospice work. We don't have a lot of humanist hospice. I mean, there's no humanist hospice. That doesn't exist as a thing. We do have a lot of folks that are getting more involved in chaplaincy work as humanists and atheists, and I think that's really important. But I've I've been a hospice volunteer off and on for many years. I love that work, and would love to be more involved in articulating a humanist vision of the dying process. I mean, and that's, I think, for tons of atheists, like the first question a Christian will ask you when you say you're an atheist, like, well, then what do you do when you, like, aren't you afraid of death? Aren't you, you know, how, the death is like a big, a big issue. So it would be cool to have more organized ideas around that to share with people.
That's a really good point. I think that is probably one of the hardest parts of the discussion to have, is end of life stuff.
Yeah.
Because if you truly do have the faith that you're about to go have basically a brand new life with no pain, and probably see a whole bunch of people that you missed that already went on before you, I feel like it's one of those discussions that, just for me, it's really important. But I feel like I almost feel a little bit of hesitation to talk about it with people that are older, where their expectation of dying soon is coming closer than, you know, me, barring like a car accident. And like, if their expectation is my real life is about to begin, and your message is basically, I'm not trying to be mean, but it actually isn't.
Right.
It's such a hard thing. And I'm honestly torn about how those conversations are very difficult.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not even torn. I just won't. I'm not going to try and talk somebody out of. And in hospice volunteer work, I've said prayers with people who are dying. I'm not coming in there to tell them they're going to the worms, like that's. But it's been interesting, and this is anecdotal because this is just my own experience. But I have found that the people who I've been with who are dying, who are very religious, struggled with it more emotionally and psychologically than people who are secular. And the same goes for their families in terms of how they faced it. I do think that like a lot of people facing death don't actually believe that they're going to heaven. They hope that and want that, but there's this nagging doubt in the back of their head, like, what if it's not true? And then there's nobody to tell them, hey, if it's not true, that's okay too. Like, you've lived a good life. You've got this legacy. Your family's safe and happy, and life well lived. Like, people need that comfort, and they don't get it because they're supposed to believe that they're going to heaven.
Yeah, exactly. I do feel very happy that I've, assuming I live to be whatever, 70, 80, 90, that I've got some time to, hopefully plenty of time to process that and then to end it on the right note. I think the part that I struggle with is there's a part of me that wants to kind of say to, like, close family, to say, look, you've believed a worldview that's not real. You passed it on, and it's not one that you can be equivocal about. It's blood magic. It's scapegoating.
Yeah.
It's a psychopathic God. It's all these bad things. Like, don't you want to kind of try to undo some of that in your last couple of years? And there's a part of me that gets pulled into that mentality, but it's either way you cut it. It's a hard thing to do. And I think sometimes when you just can tell that people just aren't ready, it's easier to let it go and just say, you know what, in your own mind, I'd love to have this conversation. It's not time yet. Maybe the time will come, maybe it won't. But it also surprises me too, like what you said, where you sense that they kind of know. I've had so many Christians where, like, somebody will die young, unexpectedly, and the Christians that are left, their experience is like, this is so horrible, beyond horrible. And it's like they enter into years of this grief, and it never really ends. And it's like, if you really believe that that person was a believer, and you are too, and you're going to see them, what are you so sad about? They just went to glory, and they're now pain-free. And it's like, it makes me wonder, maybe you really don't believe this.
Right.
And not to question their faith, but just to say, maybe it's like a psychological issue at that point.
That's my sense, is that they say the words, but like, don't believe it in their core. Like, and if you did believe it in your core, it would be a comforting idea, and people don't seem comforted by it at the end of life. And I feel really grateful that I had become an atheist right before my mom died, and she was 52. She was very young. It was a stupid, unfair death. She had uterine cancer, and hadn't had health insurance.
Mm.
And it's a very like treatable, slow growing cancer, but they hadn't detected it because she hadn't been going to the doctor. So she died very quickly. And if I had believed in an all-powerful, all-loving God, I would not have understood what happened. And it would have been a really lengthy process, I think, to get through that and to try and, you know, deal with that issue. Whereas I could just go straight into grieving and go through the grieving process. And I understand why it happened. I understand the, you know, social and political things that were in place that made this tragedy happen. I understand the science of how cancer happens. Like there's nothing for me to wrestle through and be like, why, you know, like I understand why it's stupid and it's horrible and I can grieve about it and say that it's terrible. I don't have to pretend that I'm happy she's gone and in heaven now, because she's not, and it's terrible.
Yeah. Yeah, it is terrible. I'm sorry to hear that happened. My dad died maybe a year and a half ago or so. And one of the coolest things for me was, I mean, he wasn't a good guy. He was a bit of a monster, to be honest. But like I was able to end my time with him with complete forgiveness of you know, the way he'd been to us as kids. And it was really cool to think. And I wasn't an atheist at that point, but just I was so glad to think that you know, looking back on it, obviously, you know, I know now there wasn't a God prompting me to forgive. And just to think that, you know, humans can forgive each other and mend old wounds and end things, you know, on the right note, just purely because we've got love in our hearts. You can just have love in your heart just because you choose to, just because you've got that power.
Right.
And it is neat. I wanted to end by asking you this, and I think I said I was going to end before, but I'm going to end with this question. What would you say is your inspiration for what you do, both with the organizations you work with, as well as in your life, your personal relationships? What is your motivation? What drives you? What's the passion behind the passion? And in that, is there anyone that you've seen, like maybe that other people would recognize their name, where you'd say this person has been an inspiration, either, you know, still living or not? But what are your inspirations that you look to?
And all my heroes keep falling. It's been a hashtag me too. It's been a rough a rough time for having heroes. But you know, more from, I think, my personal life rather than sort of public people. I heard a saying a while back that was be the person you needed as a child. And I had a really difficult childhood, and I had, you know, my mom had some mental illness issues, and I ended up experiencing homelessness as a teenager. And there were just a whole bunch of adults in my world that were strangers when they met me, and for whatever reason were inspired to care about me and to make sure that I was all right. And there, you know, it wasn't because of God. It was because these were good people with a conscience that decided to take responsibility for somebody that they didn't have to. And I want to be those people. I want to take responsibility for the human family and to alleviate suffering where I can. And I saw in my own life how little it takes to change somebody's life completely. Like some of the things that completely changed the trajectory of my life were very small. None of them were expensive. Nobody spent a lot of money on me. And it changed everything for me. And, you know, and that means that my kids now have a good life that they wouldn't have had if I had gone in a different direction. And I've been able to impact a lot of folks. So this sort of watching this wave come from a couple of good people doing small good things and having that become really epic is so cool. And then when you have organizations like Foundation Beyond Belief that take all of these individual people that could just be doing these individual things in their own communities, bringing all that power together, and it can amplify that in such a huge way. It's I mean, it just is so powerful. Like humanism is such a powerful worldview when we decide to take human responsibility and when we work together in organizations and communities. It's so transformative. So yeah, I mean, I think most of my inspiration comes from people and just watching the power of what they do and wanting to get in on that.
It's a great reminder. I love just the way you're painting that picture, and I've seen it. I would say ditto in my life, that sometimes it's the little stuff that someone just comes up and you're having a really bad day, and someone comes up and just says, "Hey, how you doing? I care about you."
Yeah.
And it's not it's not face it's not like just a face value thing. Like, they really mean it. I really care about you, and that it can turn everything on a dime. And I've even heard of stories where someone was suicidal and it felt like nobody cared, and just one person, they didn't mean to intervene, they didn't know they're intervening, but just one person said something nice to them, or they asked how they're doing, and that was enough to keep them from going over the edge. And what a great thing to help people leave the darkness for the light. That is life, the life that we have.
Yeah. I mean, and I think if you want to see that in action in just a small way, like I play this game called Airport Smiles. Like every time you go to the airport, people look so stressed out. They're having a bad time. Like the airport is not an easy place. Just make eye contact and smile with people. It like transforms them. It's like magic. And so like, and I know that's a little thing, but I don't know what happens next in that, somebody who's having a really rough day and all of a sudden their mood shifts into something more optimistic, that's going to impact the way they behave the whole rest of the day. So it's part, just own your humanist power and go out and use it for good.
Yeah. Well, I guess these days you'd have to draw the smile on the mask.
Right. I know. I've been working really hard at getting my eye smile to work because, like if you just do a little smile, it doesn't lift your eyes, but people still notice it if you can do a big eye smile. So,
yeah. That's awesome. Well, again, we've been speaking with Seráh Blain. Thank you so much for sharing your story, sharing your work. This has been awesome.
And speaking of sharing my work, though, let me just real quick, if people want to find out more about Foundation Beyond Belief, you can text the letters FBB to 22828, and that'll sign you up for our email list. And of course, you can check out the website at foundationbeyondbelief.org. Again, it's a really cool way of being part of the humanist community, making positive change in the world.
Whoops, muted myself. That's awesome. And I'll also put that information in the text underneath the video if you want to see it there. So yeah, please do check out Foundation Beyond Belief, get on their mailing list and all that. And Seráh, thank you so much for being willing to be open with your story and with your passions and your willingness to basically change the world as much as you can from whatever platform you've got. And we certainly hope that all of your circles of influence just keep on increasing and people really get the message that there is a better way for our planet to live, a better way for our culture to move and evolve. And, we are, as they say, we're part of the change, or change is coming, and we're part of the change management team. And, it's time to get on board. And we appreciate that you're willing to be a leader in that. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate it.